Okay, so let's look at this question here. It says in a typical percentage lease, rent is calculated as a percentage of what? Now, I want to be clear about one thing just before we start. The thing that I want to talk to you about is that a percentage lease is a commercial real estate term. So if you're a exam taker and you're doing residential property management, or you're a tenant someplace, you got a couple of investment houses, you might have never heard of a percentage lease before because this is a lease term, but it's a lease term that has to do with commercial real estate leases and specifically retail leases. So let me just give you a quick example of how this would look. Imagine that I have a warehouse someplace and I am trying to lease out the warehouse because, it's been empty for a few months and it's around July, August. And I get a call from someone who wants to rent my warehouse. Now, typically, when I rent my warehouse, it's usually for a 2 or 3 or 5 or even a 10-year lease. But I get this strange call from someone that says, "Hey, I'm calling about your warehouse for lease." I say, "Yeah, what's up?" And they say, "Well, I want to rent it." I say, "No problem." They say, "But I'm kind of got a unique situation here." And I say, "What's that?" And they say, "Well, I only want to rent it for like 4 months." And I say, "You only want to rent my warehouse for 4 months? What's going on?" And they say, "Well, I run a Halloween store. And Halloween's coming up in a few months. So really, I want to rent it from July until about mid-November." And I say, I don't know about that because, I'm looking for a 5-year or 7-year or 10-year lease. I don't really know what I would charge you for just a few months. And I say, let me think about this for a second. I say, you know what, do this. I'm going to charge you 25% right off the top of every Halloween costume you sell. So every week, you'll give me a sales report. You'll tell me how much you sold that week, and you'll give me 25% of your gross sales right off the top. Now, the good news for the Halloween store is that they don't necessarily have fixed rent expenses. They only have to pay me when they sell something. My hope is that they're going to sell a lot of product over the short-term sprint that they're doing, and I'm going to make decent money for a few months renting it to this Halloween operation. So that is one example of how a percentage lease would look. The tenant pays the landlord some percentage of their business. The tenant, the lessee, pays the landlord some percentage of their gross sales. Now, the reason that it's off the top on gross sales and not like net profit or after expenses is because as a landlord, I don't want to get into this weird, funky conversation about what your expenses were. Because, a lot of business people will put, their family's cell phone bills on their Lexus lease payment and, their kids' private school tuition and improperly classify that as business expenses. And then they're going to say, "I didn't make any profit." So a percentage lease is not based on a percentage of the net sales or net profit. It's not based on the assets of the business. It's based on the gross sales right off the top. So the benefit to this is that the landlord shares in the success of a tenant's business. The lessor, the landlord, is going to share in the success of a tenant's business. The more money the tenant makes, the more money the landlord gets paid. Now, in my story, I said that the Halloween store was going to pay 25% right off the top, but it doesn't always have to be that way. It could be some base rent. Let's say it's $5,000 a month plus 10% of the gross sales. It could be a straight percentage lease, like my first example. It could be, hey, maybe the tenant says, "Hey, I'll pay you $5,000 a month. And then the first 30K of revenue is mine. And then anything over 30,000, I'm going to pay 10% to the landlord." You can structure this kind of however you want. The real explanation here is that percentage leases are not based on the net sales. They're based on the gross sales of the tenant's business. So the best answer here, going to be answer choice C.